being here.
Zach can do it. Zach's doing it.
Okay, so sorry I accidentally exited the meeting, but thank you everyone for joining us today. I would like to introduce our speakers today. We have Dr. Faye Sun and Dr. Scott Counts joining us today. Town and Gown is sponsored by Age Alive, a program in the College of Osteopathic Medicine dedicated to aging with vitality, along with East Lansing Primetime Senior Center and the Social Science Scholars Program. To introduce our speakers today, I will start with Dr. Scott Counts. His presentation, along with Dr. Faye Sun, is on the latest in dementia research.
In progress.
Dr. Counts received his bachelor's degree in history from Davidson College. After working for several years as a chemist at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, he went on to earn his Ph.D. in neuroscience from Emory University, studying mechanisms of familial Alzheimer's disease with Dr. Allan Levey. In 2013, he was recruited to Michigan State University as an associate professor of translational neuroscience and family medicine at the Grand Rapids campus. His current research focuses on molecular mechanisms of neuronal projection system vulnerability in MCI/AD, as well as vascular contributions to dementia. Dr. Faye Sun is a professor of social work at Michigan State University. His research interests primarily focus on seeking psychosocial interventions to minimize the impact of Alzheimer's disease on elders, family caregivers, and communities. To date, he has over 50 peer-reviewed articles in the form of gerontology and health. He has received research funding from federal and state governmental agencies, as well as from nonprofit foundations. His work included a study examining knowledge and beliefs of Alzheimer's disease in Chinese American elders in Phoenix. And with that introduction, I would like to turn it over to our speakers.
Okay, good. Ask everyone at home to mute their mics.
Oh, I was asked if folks at home could mute their mics. So we don't get that sort of, feedback or whatever. But everyone can hear me okay? Is that right? I think that thing's picking up. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So this is sort of an abridged version of a talk that would, typically last. What I did is stuff. So how about that? And it's just talking about the latest, sort of where we are right now with dementia research. All right, so why am I not able to forward? Let's see. Okay, so I'll just do the inner. Okay, now I got it now, I think. So our topics, okay, sure. Okay. So our topics then are, we're going to talk a little bit about just the brain basics, kind of get us on all of the same sort of a level playing field from that perspective. Talk a little bit about just dementia in general. Go in more specifically into Alzheimer's disease, that's the AD right there. Talk a little bit about diagnostics, what we're doing right now with imaging living folks, right? To try and find out, or to everything to blood tests. So what we're trying to do is find these relatively non-invasive and inexpensive ways of trying to identify people who are in the early stages of the disease so they can be moved into clinical trials and the drugs will have a better chance of working, or we can just begin. And I'm not sure how to do this microphone thing, so if that's going to be, is that going to be on the whole time?
Should be.
Okay. All right. Well, all right. So anyway, and then we'll talk about some therapies. There have been a couple of accelerated approval of a couple of drugs, and we can talk about that. One is fairly promising. The other one is probably never going to be used in the U.S., probably more than likely. And then we'll talk about, short of a treatment, what can we do for prevention? Okay, so here's our, there's a human brain over here. I'll just kind of stand around, hope you can still hear me. The brain, we always say it has weighs 3 pounds and has 3 parts. Okay, so basically we start here at the bottom stem. So this actually connects to the spinal cord. So it's like the little stem that the brain sits on. So it's called the brain stem. And this is an area that's involved in attention and vigilance. So it's a very primitive structure. Basically it's the part of our brain that like an animal would use as part of its brain to make sure it's not about to be eaten, right? So it's that vigilance. And also some autonomic functions such as controlling your heart rate and your breathing. And there are actually areas in the brainstem that degenerate very early in Alzheimer's disease. And that probably plays into a person's inability to remember because they're losing their ability to pay attention to things. Okay. The other part, which really isn't affected at all much in Alzheimer's disease, is the cerebellum. That's our balance and coordination center. And then we have the cerebrum, which is the big part here, and it's in 4 different lobes there, right? And so we've got the frontal lobe, like right behind the forehead. That's our sort of executive function, like making plans and making decisions, things like that, as well as certain aspects of our personality are controlled by activity in the frontal lobe. The parietal lobe, which is kind of like around the crown of your head, right? That's the area that sort of takes all the input information that's coming in that you're experiencing, and then sort of helping you decide what to do with that information. So it's kind of a way station, if you will. Okay, so I'll stay over here and point a lot. Okay. And then the temporal lobe, which is just basically right behind the ear, right? This is an area that degenerates very early in Alzheimer's disease. That's our
Professor, could you stand closer to the microphone, please? It's very difficult to hear.
Okay. I just need that. I'm not sure. Sorry, I'm up here at the podium and the microphone's down on the table, so it's it's not operating. No. Oh, perfect. Okay. How's that for sound? Y'all hear it better now? So can you hear
No,
me
it's
now?
not any better.
We can't hear you.
Where do you want me to go?
Wherever you were standing when you first started to speak was very clear.
You guys hear me now?
No.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
I apologize for the inconvenience for everyone. We appreciate your patience. People in the Robertson room are working on getting this fixed, so hopefully we should have everything squared away in just a few minutes.
Okay, so apparently this is as good as we're going to be able to do. Are y'all able to hear me now? Okay, tragedy narrowly averted. So anyway, in that middle panel there, if you were to take, I've sort of lost my train of thought with all this. But if you were able to take, brain, slice it real thin, put it on a microscope slide and used a special stain, what you would see would be the resident main cells of the brain. Those are called neurons. And as you can see, they have this little cell body right there in the middle, and then they have all these branches, right, that are coming off of it. They're actually quite striking to look at under a microscope. And we sort of think of this as sort of a forest of these neurons that are in the brain. And so you can see how all these branches that are coming off are actually connecting with the other neurons, the other cells. So all these cells are connecting to each other, and they're talking to each other by sort of spitting out neurochemical messages, okay? And then the neuron that receives that message, then it responds, and so on and so on. And these and what we call these connections are synapses. And synapses is just simply a Greek word that means come together, okay? And so that's the big thing. We've got our cells or neurons, and they connect to each other through these synapses. And in Alzheimer's disease, what happens is these neurons in cognitive brain regions start to degenerate. And when they degenerate, their branches start to recede, and then they stop talking to each other. And that's kind of an oversimplification, obviously, of the issue, but that's basically what's going on. So maybe it's not. Okay, let's see. Well, not forward to see. All right, I lost my, could you just forward it for me? Yeah, thanks. Okay. So just talking about dementia. So it's important to remember dementia is sort of an umbrella term. Okay. I think a lot of times Alzheimer's disease and dementia get sort of conflated. But really what it is that Alzheimer's disease is simply the most common cause of dementia. It's that underlying disease that causes the damage to those brain connections, those synapses that control your knowledge and memory and attention and judgment, problem solving and language. So a lot of people, it's a vascular dementia that's vascular causes of their dementia. So you just have a stroke in the wrong place, for instance. And then there's some other dementias like frontotemporal and Lewy body dementia you've probably heard of. And then there's some that are actually potentially treatable. Like sometimes, you get to the point where you're taking so many medications that they start interacting with each other in a funny way, and it starts to impair your thinking skills. And so you just switch out, try different combinations or switch out your medicines. And then of course, things like treating depression, treating hypothyroidism, and treating especially vitamins, but mainly vitamin B12. That's a very important vitamin for cognition. So if you can take vitamin B12 supplements, that's always a good idea, or get it through your diet. Next slide. So when we think about the socioeconomic impact of dementia, so these slides are from the Alzheimer's Society that's based in London. And these are the latest figures that they have out, sort of moving from left to right in the sort of the red squares there. So basically worldwide, every 3 seconds, someone is developing dementia. These are kind of staggering numbers to think about. The estimated growth in the number of folks with dementia is expected to, basically double by the time we get to 2050. And then that's going to cost us basically by 2030, some almost $3 trillion. And so if global dementia care was a country, it would be the 14th largest economy in the world, right behind Australia. And Australia is not even a country, it's a continent. So that's, and so right here in Michigan. And so the other thing I want to mention is if you can get these facts, all this stuff from the Alzheimer's Association website. They have a thing that'll be called, I don't think they published the 2023 version yet, but there will be a 2022 Alzheimer's disease facts and figures. And it talks all about the different kinds of dementia, has these numbers like this, and updates on the research and everything. So, and you can just, download it. You can print it out from your computer or download it as a PDF. But here in Michigan, we've got about roughly, I think, about 200,000 folks that are age 65 or older with Alzheimer's disease. And so that doesn't include people that have dementing syndromes from other causes, right? And that's estimated to increase about 16% just in the next couple of years. As far as our payouts for this stuff, so Medicaid is currently costing Michigan about $1.5 billion for dementia care, for Alzheimer's disease. That's also expected to increase by 16, 17% by 2025. And our Medicare expenditures in the state per capita are about $30,000 per person. And if you think about that extrapolated by, 200,000 people per year, and, states only get so much money for Medicare, it's eating up a large piece of the pie, right? And then the one in the middle that I always like to point out, and Faye is going to discuss in more detail, is the caregiving. Currently, we have in Michigan, as of last year, there was an estimated 466,000 caregivers providing almost 500 million hours of unpaid care at a value of $8.5 billion. Okay, and so we tend to think of the caregivers or the care partners as sort of the second patient, right? Because you're having to be the one taking care of this person. Even though it's obviously it's a labor of love, but at the same time, it can wear on you. 60% of the caregivers report chronic health problems, and even as much as almost 30% have reported just depression from the situation. So again, and like I said, Faye is going to give us some caregiving tips, if you will, at his talk. And so just a brief overview of Alzheimer's disease. This is a picture of Dr. Alzheimer. That's a picture of his first patient. That's actually a photograph. It doesn't really look like it, but it is. And her name was August Dieter. This was at basically a sanitarium in Munich. And it was describing this patient and then looking at her brain after she died, that he wrote a paper that basically described the disease that eventually became known as Alzheimer's disease. Okay, so and one of the things that he kept in his notes was that, when she has to write Mrs. August D, she's unable to progress in writing and repeats simply, "I've lost myself." And so I think those 4 words kind of sum up what you see, the clinical part of problem with Alzheimer's disease right there. So, you become, disconnected from your past and just only, fragmentary reaction to the present. And everything that you've built up in your life is just gone, and you've just sort of lost your self-identity, right? And as I mentioned, Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia in the elderly. And again, what differentiates it from other forms of dementia is that it typically begins with that memory loss, right? That's the main thing, is just the memory. And then you get into issues with impaired language, and then eventually you're unable to just do, your simple things that you would do every day, right? And of course, the biggest problem of all this is that the disease is irreversible, and we still haven't figured out a way to slow it down just yet. Okay, so here are just some eyeballology of what the brain looks like in Alzheimer's disease. So you can see in our sort of black and white photo there, how the brain on the right is, and the Alzheimer's brain is shrunken compared to the normal brain on the left. And then if you look at the sort of the slice, which is sort of kind of, a slice like this, you can see that shrinkage, right? And one area I want to point out in particular is this hippocampus, right? So that hippocampus, that structure of the brain is the main storage center of the brain. Hippocampus is Greek for seahorse, and the people that described it initially thought it looked like a seahorse. So that's how it became called the hippocampus. It's kind of interesting. But you can see how degenerated it is in the Alzheimer's disease brain, that memory center, right? And so again, what's happening, like I mentioned, those neurons, remember, with all the branches, they start to degenerate, and then their branches retract, and then you lose those connections, right? Those synapses. Okay, and it's, for some reason, one of the big mysteries is why this happens specifically in brain areas that control things like memory and attention and those executive functions, right? And so if we, again, took a brain, sliced it real thin, put it on a microscope slide, and used some special stains, we would see the 2 main pathologies that are used to diagnose Alzheimer's disease. And you probably read about this in any sort of, popular publication or whatever, but they're called, you hear, plaques and tangles, right? And so these plaques are actually, they build up between the neurons. So they're kind of out there in the forest where the branches are, right? And Dr. Alzheimer drew those. Those are some of the plaques that he drew for Mrs. Dieter's brain. And what we know now is, so this is an actual picture of an Alzheimer's brain as you would see it under a microscope. And so those big brown gumballs right there, those are those plaques, and that's completely abnormal. Those should not be there. And what I want you to keep in mind is that, because this will be helpful later, is that these aggregates are made of a protein called amyloid, okay, or A beta, okay? So just kind of keep that in mind. And then I forgot on the other slide to mention that Dr. Alzheimer wasn't the only person working on the disease at the time. There was also Dr. Fischer, who was a German citizen, but he was working in Prague. And then there's also Dr. Solomon Fuller, who was an African-American working at Clark University outside of Boston. And so he actually presented a paper on basically what was Alzheimer's disease the same year that Dr. Alzheimer published his paper. And so there are lots of different people working on this disease at about the same time. And so Dr. Fischer, those are his drawings of plaques. Okay, so again, a lot of people are seeing these things. It's just somehow Dr. Alzheimer got lucky and his name was attached to it, or infamous, I guess, if you think about the disease. About 1908, 1909. Yep. So about 120 years ago, 115 years ago, roughly. Yep. Yeah, and so we've known about the disease all this time and haven't really, I mean, despite all the progress we've made, it's such a puzzle that we can't seem to get at a good solution. The other pathology, these are called the tangles, and those actually build up inside of those neurons. So these are inside of the neurons, okay? And so Dr. Alzheimer drew some of those tangles that he saw using some special stains and looking at brain tissue. And so this is actually all these brown little objects here. Those are all those neurons, okay? This is what you'd be seeing under a microscope slide, under a microscope. And all that brown, that's a stain that's detecting those tangles. And so that's also completely abnormal. There should be no staining there at all. They should just be clear. Okay, but what I want you to remember is that these tangles are made up of another protein. It's called tau. So we've got the plaques are amyloid and the tangles are tau. And that'll make a little more sense in just a minute. And then just to show you that Dr. Fuller, again, was making his own drawings of this pathology 115 years ago or so. Okay, so the latest in diagnostics. So we talked about, let me just back up a little bit. So we talked about imaging in living subjects, and we talked about blood tests, and so that's what we're going to talk about here. And the reason that diagnosis is so important is because of just sort of the way the disease works and where we need to really, and the rationale for needing to find people in the earliest stages. Okay, so what this chart is showing is your your life course on the bottom there. So birth to death, and then on basically as you go down, that's worsening of conditions, and up is doing normal, right? And so most of us kind of hope we stay on that yellow line and just wind up with some good old-fashioned age-related memory loss. Unfortunately, way too many people are veering off of that normal curve and descending into Alzheimer's disease and a total loss of function. So one area that we're trying to identify, folks, is when they have mild cognitive impairment. That's what the MCI stands for, mild cognitive impairment. And so these are, and amnestic is just the adjective for amnesia, right? So it's a memory related thing, right? So the person's having memory problems that aren't exactly normal. And this as you get older, it becomes hard to figure out what's normal and what's not. But you're able to sort of compensate until the disease really just starts to take over. Now, one of the problems with this is that a lot of these cognitive brain regions already are showing a significant loss of those neurons, those cells, by the time you have a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment. Okay. So what we're really trying to do is find folks in the preclinical AD. So like before you even have the symptoms, right? So it's thought that Alzheimer's disease might actually begin decades before you get symptoms, right? And so the brain's very resilient, which is good, but that, in a way, it can also be bad because by the time you're presenting, it's almost too late because the damage is so extensive, right? But what we're doing with the imaging is trying to find people in this preclinical stage of AD, and now this looks real complicated, but just we can walk through this, okay? So you guys have heard of PET scans, right? So the PET scans like mainly used to detect tumors and things like that, okay? What they have now is they have special PET scans where they can actually enable you to see the plaques, which are the amyloid or the A beta there. I'm going to have to point here. So that right there, see, it says A beta. So that's the amyloid in the brain, okay, of a living person, okay. And then these are the same people. This is the same person, but now we're looking at a PET signal for tau, which is picking up those tangles, okay. All right. So what you see then is that the person at the top is normal. That's just some background signal. You see the person at the bottom who's 70, and you see all that signal, those hot spots coming up. So the brain's just loaded with these plaques and loaded with these tangles. Then you see the two normal people so they have no cognitive issues yet, but you look at the differences between the two. So one looks like the normal one above it, and the other one looks more like the AD brain below it, right? And so maybe that person is in preclinical Alzheimer's disease, and we could get them into a clinical trial, right? Or start treating them with whatever drugs we have available to us. A second thing that we can do is look at what's called FDG PET, and this is more like what they use to detect tumors. But here, what you're doing is instead of looking for a hot spot where there's a lot of cell activity, which is what a tumor would be, you're looking more for cold spots, which is where there's the cell activity is actually decreasing because the neurons aren't functioning well, right? And so you see so A and B right there, and this is this one right here. Okay, so A and B, those are two people with normal cognition, right? But they sort of look the same, but if you look at the one on the right, you can see where you're kind of losing some of that hotspot red signal there, like right up here, see? And so that shows you that there's like a decrease of activity in those brain areas. And so again, that person could be preclinical because they're showing these differences, but they're still normal. Okay, so that would be another example of a way we could identify folks. And then we could always just do regular MRI, which shows you the structure of the brain, right? And again, this is in living people. And again, you can see the difference between the AD brain is much more shrunken compared to the cognitively normal brain, CN. And then this person with mild cognitive impairment is starting to show some changes, but not nearly as bad as the AD person. So again, trying to find these folks early is going to be the key. And so right now, really, that's really great. The problem with that is that you can only do it at specialized places. So really, in Michigan, the only place you can get, for instance, look at the amyloid and the tangles and the plaques in your brain with a PET scan is at University of Michigan. Okay, we did have a lady who was doing it at MSU, but she moved, and we're trying to get it back up and running over in Grand Rapids, and I think they're trying to get it back up and running in East Lansing as well here. So anyway, the thing with the blood test, though, is it's going to be cheaper. It's going to be easier to administer than these PET scans or MRIs. They used to collect cerebral spinal fluid and look for potential markers for, like preclinical Alzheimer's disease, but that requires a spinal tap, and not too many people really want to do that every year. In fact, I think usually what the story you hear is that we can get people to do it once, but then we have a really hard time getting them to do it the next year because they don't like the experience. And again, the blood test is much more practical for community-based medicine, just to screen folks and then refer them to specialists if the need arises. And so some of our lead candidates are, again, back with the amyloid and the tau. So looking at lower amyloid in the blood. And what that means is as the amyloid coalesces into these plaques in the brain, there's less of it. And so it'll go down in the blood. And then you get higher levels of tau. And specifically, there's a modification of the tau and we just call it p-tau. And what you see is increases of the p-tau. And so what this is just measurements of p-tau in blood for individuals. All those little dots there represents an individual. And as you can see, there's a lot of overlap because we're all different, right? But the one on the green, that's a cognitively normal person. The blue is a person are people with mild cognitive impairment, but who did not progress to Alzheimer's disease. Over time. So they call it stable mild cognitive impairment. And then the folks in the yellow are people who were mild cognitive impairment, but progressed to Alzheimer's disease. And then the red are the folks with Alzheimer's. And so you do see this increase. It's, you know, it's significant. It's still a lot of overlap. And so obviously there's still a lot of work to do in trying to get these blood tests to work. So let's talk about the latest in treatments. So, you know, if we can't, you know, cure the disease, which is probably too heavy of a lift right now, we can at least try and slow it down. Okay. And so the drug you may have heard of for a couple, you know, from a few years ago was the Aduhelm or aducanumab. And what these antibodies, what these drugs are, that they're potentially coming to market, are there antibodies to those plaques in the brain? Okay, and so a good way to think of you know, an example of an antibody is like, so for instance, if you got a COVID infection, your body would make antibodies to the virus, and then you'd be able to fight it. They would go, those antibodies go like heat-seeking missiles and go and find the virus and kill it. And so what we've done here is we've artificially made antibodies to the plaques. And so you go into an infusion clinic and it gets into your bloodstream, and they go up into the brain and attack those plaques and get rid of them. Okay, and so the idea is if we get rid of the plaques, then it'll improve people's memory functions. Okay, and so what this drug did, it worked as far as removing amyloid. So you can see here, this is 4 different individuals. Okay, and on the left here is sort of their baseline amyloid scan, and so you can see all those hot spots, the red, you know, where all the amyloid is. And then the person who took the placebo 1 year later still had all that hot spot, so nothing happened. But the people who took these 3 different doses got a lot of reduction of that amyloid. Okay. Problem is, it didn't do much for the cognition. There were 2 phase 3 trials, and these are like the big trials with thousands of people, and over the course of, you know, a couple years, they had 2 identical trials running at the same time. Okay, and we don't need to go through the specifics of what's, you know, on here, but basically what happened was the Emerge trial, which is they always name these trials, showed 20% less decline in global cognition. So just your brain function declined 20% less at the highest dose, with the highest dose of the drug compared to the placebo. But the other trial, the Engage trial, showed absolutely no effect. And so basically you had one trial that worked a little, and then the other trial that didn't work at all. And the FDA gave this accelerated approval, and you may remember it led to this big stink where the advisory panelists all were quitting because the FDA was sort of going against what they wanted them to do. And one of the other problems that, again, the advisory panel, and these are people that were actually running these trials, and statisticians and folks like that, is that you get these adverse effects. And there's a phrase that we use in the field. It's called ARIA, A-R-I-A, and it stands for amyloid-related imaging abnormality. And it's, you know, that's just a random name that they came up with to describe it. But what these abnormalities are evidence for brain swelling and brain bleeds from taking the drug. Okay, so 35% of the patients were showing swelling, and 35% of the patients were showing bleeding in the brain. So that's obviously not a good thing. But again, it got accelerated approval. And what that basically means is that they're requiring another trial to verify that there's a clinical benefit and a good safety profile. And if they can show that, then they may get the full approval, where then it would actually, you know, be on the shelf, so to speak. But most medical centers aren't even offering it, especially here in Michigan. And right now, the Medicare is only going to, it's a very expensive drug as well. And Medicare is only going to cover it if you're in one of these trials. And so there's only a couple thousand people that even have access to Medicare payments for this. And so it's barely used here in the US based on those restrictions and the high cost. And again, not even clear that it even works, you know, so. But that leads us to the next one. This is the one that just came out this year. Okay, this is lecanemab. Again, it's another one of those antibodies that goes up and finds the plaques and gets rid of them. It was designed to attack a different part of the amyloid. You know, it's kind of hard to describe, but anyway, what they found was in a let's see, it's a weird font there, huh? Not sure what happened, but anyway, what they found was that in an early trial, they were able to show that the lecanemab also reduced the amount of amyloid. So basically the difference between that black line and that green line is showing you how the amyloid was being lowered by taking the drug. So it's working, it's doing the same thing that the other drug did. So it's actually working in that sense. And then this next trial, what it showed, this was again the big phase 3 trial, that showed a 27% slowing of cognitive decline over 18 months. So it's the difference between this yellow line and the blue line. So this is, worsening of conditions is going down. So you're getting worse faster with the placebo than you are with the lecanemab. And what's also interesting is that it looks like that gap is widening as you go, right? So it's kind of starting to funnel out. And so maybe if you treat people longer, you might even get a better effect, okay? And so based on the reporting of this, the company's now applied for full FDA approval. And the other interesting thing about it is this drug, the trade name is going to be Leqembi or something, is that those side effects was about 35% in with the other drug. Now it's about 12 to 17%. So that's a little bit more, acceptable, I guess, because I mean, all drugs will have side effects. So, all right. So short of a treatment, what can we do to lower our risk? Well, one thing we can do is monitor our blood pressure and keep it normal. Okay. This is the SPRINT trial. Basically, what's good for the heart is good for the brain. Just remember that. So this is the SPRINT trial, and what they did is they had two groups, and these were folks who, again, it was almost 9,000 people with high blood pressure, but they didn't have any diabetes or any dementia or prior strokes that they could see on MRI. Okay, and they put them into two groups. One was they tried to keep that. They want it to be like 120/80 or whatever, and that top number is the systolic. So they're trying to keep that top number below 120, and then in the standard care group, they just were trying to keep it below 140. And then what they found, our last little bullet point there, was that there were significant reductions in the risk of developing the mild cognitive impairment or dementia in that intensive control group compared to the standard care group. Okay, and so this was the strongest evidence to date linking high blood pressure treatment with dementia risk. Exercise. It's springtime, beautiful day. We got to get out and move around. I think back in COVID when everyone was out walking around, we were probably doing ourselves some good there, right? And this is a latest one. This is called the EXERT trial. This is an 18-month trial. They've got 300 people with mild cognitive impairment at 13 different clinics. They've got two groups. One's more of an aerobic exercise group, and the other one's more stretching and range of motion exercises. And then they've got a sort of a control group from the same clinics, about 100 people who just don't exercise. Okay, and what they found was sort of after 12 months into the trial, they just sort of did an interim analysis, and what they found was that the exercise groups were showing no cognitive decline, but that control group that wasn't exercising was demonstrating cognitive decline. So yeah, pretty cool. The other thing we do is diet. Okay, of course, we've heard about the Mediterranean diets, the fish and vegetables and fruit and all that, right? That reduces AD risk factors. Like, again, it helps you control your blood pressure, controls diabetes, controls inflammation. This study kind of turned everything on its head. So this is a Brazilian study of over 10,000 people. Their average age was about 50, so a good middle-aged crowd. And they were followed for over 10 years. So that's kind of what makes this study a little more powerful, is just the sheer size of it, right? And what they did is they compared rates of cognitive decline in people who consumed high amounts of ultra-processed food compared to folks who did not. And so what they defined as ultra-processed foods, as you can see there in the quotations, things that go through significant industrial processes and contain large quantities of fat, sugar, salt, artificial flavors and preservatives, et cetera. And the main examples were burgers and fries, pizzas, cookies, chips, basically everything in life that gives us pleasure. If they're saying that's bad for us, right? But the high consumption group did show a 30% faster rate of cognitive decline with respect to memory and verbal fluency, which is, like word recall, things like that, and executive function. And again, there is an increased risk for dementia in lower income folks. And so this becomes a health disparities issue that needs to be addressed. But one of the reasons that there is that health disparity may amount to access to healthy foods. And then finally, building a resilient brain. So of course, we've all heard the thing, do your crossword puzzles and all that, and that'll keep things going. Well, it turns out there might actually be something to that. This was the Rush Memory and Aging Project, and that's over in Chicago. And these are people that's basically Chicagoans that sign up for this. And they collected data over the course of 8 years on over 2,000 participants who started the study at an average age of 80 and had no cognitive issues, right? And so what they found was the people with the highest levels of mental activity, and again, it was just, this combination of reading and writing and playing card games and puzzles and all that, they developed dementia at 94, whereas the people with the lowest levels of mental activity developed dementia at 86, if they develop dementia at all, right? But what they found was that in a lot of the almost 700 autopsies that they did, the plaques and tangles were the same. And so the pathology was the same, but you were just doing better because you were kind of making your brain more resilient to the pathology in your brain. So with that, I will stop and turn the floor over to Faye, Dr. Sun. And these are just folks in the lab and collaborators and Spartan Strong. There you go. Thank you.
Well, good evening. My name is Fei Sung. I'm a professor with the School of Social Work at MSU. I passed by this beautiful building like many times. I just never figured out I got a chance to step in. And what I call it is like the beautiful serendipity. So it's very nice meeting you all. And thank you for coming in person. And also for those of you who join online. Actually, this is my first time meeting Scott in person. We had a lot of online meetings. Yeah, and you're actually, they call it, you're taller than I thought, when we're sitting here.
It's always, there's at least one three-dimensional meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you, Scott, also for, sort through those technology problems. So I should have no technology problems now. Despite all those medical breakthroughs, we talked about like 2 recent medications had been developed to targeting amyloid, trying to addressing the biological, etiologic causes of Alzheimer's disease. People still live in daily life. We still have a lot of problems to solving. People with Alzheimer's disease, they still live up to like more than 10 years. So how to make sure they still have good quality of life? How to make sure caregivers still have good quality of life themselves remains important. So that's what I'm going to focus on as a social worker, how we can live now by providing care and support to family caregivers. So I'm going to first cover, why this is important to us. And then I'm talking about, in our dominant framework, we consider caregiving is a stressful thing. And what are some of the reasons that are causing the stressors for caregivers? How we can get, some support for them. Then we need to change our paradigm to thinking about, are there any positive, are there any rewarding experience associated with caregiving? Then lastly, I'm going to share with you some local resources and online resources that might be helpful to you. So let me ask you those 3 questions. So by show of your hands, how many of you are currently taking care of someone or know someone or have taken care of someone who has dementia? Oh, I saw a couple of them in this room. And how many of you have received care from someone? How many of you in your life have received care from someone else? It doesn't mean you have dementia, you just received care from somebody. Great, we all received care when we were a baby. My assistant, Wan, is there. He's taking care of his 2-year-old toddler here. So we all received care, probably we can remember when we were young. And do you have a friend, relative, or know someone who has dementia? See, by all the 3 questions, probably all of you raise your hands. So caregiving is an inevitable thing in our life. We were either a current caregiver or we were a caregiver or received care from somebody else, or probably in the future, we are going to be a caregiver. So caregiving is very critical to our life. So that relates back to Scott's, talk about the global impact of Alzheimer's disease. Let's just focus on the US. So currently, in the United States, just counting Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, there's about 6.7 million people living with Alzheimer's disease. So that translates into about like 11 million family caregivers who are providing care to them. Basically, one care recipient probably translates into 2 or 3 caregivers. So on average, just in last year, in 2022, those caregivers, they provide, if we count like 8 hours a day, during the 365 days a year, over the 200 days, they provide 8 hours care. And those cares are not paid. So if we translate those into dollar amounts, that amounts to over $300 billion. So Scott mentioned globally, it's about like $1.5 trillion. So in the US alone, the cost for caregiving, if the government will like pay those family caregivers, it will cost the government 5% of their budget, total federal budget expense. So that's more than like about half of the Medicare cost. So, but those costs are fall on the shoulders of caregivers. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the needs of older adults with dementia or cognitive impairment. This is a common needs that we see in elders with cognitive impairment or dementia. First of all, financial needs. The 2 medications Scott mentioned, particularly the last one, the Aduhelm, it costs about over $500,000 a year. It's very expensive. So the financial cost associated with medications, not to mention, those care you have to provide for this patient. Tied to the financial cost is the medical needs. Not just the drug cost, but also relate to going to those procedures, seeing the doctors, and other expenses. The daily care needs. The daily care needs could be very stressful for the family caregivers, including assistance with activities of daily living, like feeding, dressing, eating. I will go into a little bit of details a little bit. Also psychosocial needs. So persons with dementia, they still have psychosocial needs. They still respond to the outside world, even though there's decline in their cognition. Even at the very later stages, they can still respond to, familiar music, familiar church musics. They can still squeeze your hand by showing the appreciation. There are still many ways they can respond to the world, not to mention those people in MCI or early stages. So why there is no such social participation for those patients? Why society doesn't make accommodations for those patients? So that's something we also need to focus on, is their psychosocial needs. By addressing those psychosocial needs could possibly slow down or delay their cognitive decline. So the needs of the care recipients were well translated into the burden or translated to the needs of the caregivers. So caregivers, when they're taking care of a person with dementia, they may feel this, the stress of financial strains. They may have physical health, their physical health may be impacted. They may feel the burden, physical burden, or emotional burden. At the very beginning, they were so worried, they'll keep looking for cure, for treatment. During the middle stage, they have to deal with those behavior problems. Could also be very stressful. At the end stage, they will probably anticipate, the loss. So there's grief associated with that. So they are kind of going through an emotional roller coaster during this caregiving journey. So the current dementia caregiving literature is guided by this framework. So we consider there are stressors. There are also some mediators, which is, you can see the 3 things in the middle, which is going to be our focus today. Our appraisal, how we look at caregiving, how we look at elder care, how we look at our family values, those consider appraiser. The second domain is a coping strategy. How do we cope? The third one is support. How do we, do we have social support? Where do we draw our strengths? Where do we draw our help? So the stressors will impact caregiver health and mental health, but there are some middle points. Those mediators could mediate, the impact of stressors on the health and mental health of care recipients. So what we are going to focus on is the three mediators, how we can look at caregiving more positively. How do we define our coping styles? And how do we can, where do we draw our strengths and support to help with the situation? So what are the primary stressors? When I work with families, who are taking care of some loved ones, they often mention like, oh, I love my mother, I love my father, I'm managing, taking him well in the house. But one day he just become incontinent. So that becomes the last straw. I have to think about sending him to a nursing home. So we heard a lot about ADLs, activities of daily living, and being incontinent is one of the primary stressors that caregivers say, that's probably the last straw. There are other like, breaking point, but that's what I often heard. So assisting with eating, dressing, transferring from bed to, to the bedroom. Even about eating, even at early stage, you'll say, oh, my mom is not eating well. My mom doesn't feel like eating. We rule out all other medical causes, but she is not just eating. So we will help with the family members to go through, from very basic physical reasons to psychological reasons. Maybe that's the last domain that she feels independent. She wants to control that. By refusing to eat, that shows she still has autonomy. So we have to respect that. Or maybe she is socially lonely. She wants someone to join dinner with her. Maybe the food itself is not tasteful. So we'll sort through different reasons to help family caregivers to find the best ways to feed the care recipient. So just an example, instrumental activity of daily living, as people's cognitive decline, so their ability to handling, finance, for example, if the husband used to handle all the bills at the home and the wife has been stay home, doing all the other things. But if the husband has Alzheimer's disease, the wife have to be on a fast speed to learn all those things, how we can help them. But the other way around, so if the wife used to does all the cooking and do the housekeeping in the house, and the wife has dementia or has Alzheimer's disease, how we can help the husband picking up those like cooking, those instrumental activities of living skills. So Alzheimer's disease not only affects our, thinking, abstract thinking, calculation, orientation to time and space, and executive functioning, but also going to affect our 5 basic senses that we use to learn about the world. Like, my assistant toddler at his development age at 2, he probably using his vision, hearing, touching, smelling, and tasting to know the world. But when dementia advances to the later stage, it's going to affect our 5 senses. I'm going to show you an example. I know you have been sitting here, and also people in the room probably sitting for a little while. I'm going to ask you to extend your arms like this. Don't be afraid to hit someone beside you. If you hit them, say hi. Nice to meet you. Nice to hit you. So that represents our peripheral region when we were in our 20s. Imagine when you're 20s going to college. So that's probably your side vision can still see that far away. But as we advance to age 75, bring it forward a little bit. So that represents normal aging. Even when we have normal aging, we will have like a cataract or other, vision problems. But even our side vision, peripheral vision, narrow down a little bit. That's on the condition you have no Alzheimer's disease. That's just natural aging. But when we have at early stage of Alzheimer's disease, like 2 years since the symptoms, onset. So you're liking wearing Google, try to put that on your eyes to see how this has been narrowed. See? And then at the moderate stage, like 5 years, around 5 years, you're probably liking wearing a binocular. So I exaggerate a bit, but that's how our vision changed. And at the later stage, like 7 years or longer, you're like wearing monocular. So if I'm coming to Margaret, right? Mana. So try to extend my arms to greeting her. But if I'm not walking within the vision, she probably not see me. right? She probably started. And well, you can also see people's gait, people's walking change when they advance to that vision stage. They probably like walking on a line because they are not seeing. How that impacts our life? How that impacts our life? Take a picture of this. So if we are just reading newspaper, watching like a soap drama at home, that doesn't affect much, right? We can still see. But if you are walking on the stairs, so this looks as the stairs, black and white. But if someone's vision is like this, you only see within the black circle. It's easily to triple to 4, right? So those are still implications, and how we can accommodate those changes. I'm just using vision as an example. Some people will complain about their hearing changes, their tasting, their smelling changes. So even those 5 basic senses, we rely on to acquire new information or to know about the world has an impact. As caregivers, how we can handle this, right? So I'm going to show another example. If I'm going to ask you to, okay.
They can't hear you.
Oh, they can't hear me if I step away. Okay. Right. Okay, I'm going to show like example of like shaking hands or greeting. I mentioned how important the social needs of persons with dementia, but sometimes the family members feel awkward to bring them to the churches because they probably do some improper behaviors, or sometimes when people greet them. So if I'm pretend I'm a person with dementia, just pretending. So you are shaking hand with me. So if she is extending hand with me, I probably like this, and then I'm dragging you down, right? Yeah. So another way to shake hand with them, you can do this way. You don't try to. This is like our age alive symbol, butterfly.
Right.
So here, we call it. Sometimes we call it hand by hand strategy. So when you extend his like big thumbs, you wrap it around and wrap it around, and then you move this. So you give her a strength. So when you try to lift her up, when you try to feed her, even when I'm feeding, so I can give, I can hold the spoon, but she can still use it using her own strength to feed herself.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, thank you. And the physical and cognitive psychosocial well-being of caregivers can also be affected, could be a stressor for the family caregivers. And then the last one is the behavioral and psychological problems. I just list a few here: wandering, agitation, suspicion, aggression, and hallucinations. How much time do we have?
Roughly 10 minutes.
Okay, then probably we're not going to see this video. We can skip it. So this video is about a family caregiver share her story about taking care of her mother has dementia. She first studied how stressful it was, and then once she's switched the perspective, and she found the caregiving can also have some rewarding experience for her. The secondary stressors, I don't want to mention it, elaborate them. So let's move on to switch gear. We most of the time we talk about how taking care of someone could be stressful, and typically 3 to 5 years, based on our research, we found that is the most critical point when caregivers tend to feel the breakdown. A lot of times we see some, I wouldn't say purposely abusive behaviors, probably like ignore, neglectful behaviors, typically when the caregivers have been in the journey for more than like 3 years, for 4 years. They experience a lot. We saw this as a sign of crying for help, not necessarily as a sign of abuse or neglect. But I also want to challenge you a little bit. What are some positive sides of providing care to someone? Most of you raise your hand when I ask the 3 questions. Just tell me, what are some positive things by providing care to someone? When do you want to start? What are some positive things start taking care of someone? Intimacy? Good. You found your relationship with the care recipient has been strengthened. Strengthen the relationship. You found you have better connection to the person. You probably heard more stories about the person when he started to traveling back in time. You probably didn't know your father's childhood. Once he had dementia, you keep telling those stories. What other things? I want to hear from you. Just name one thing that you feel. Mm-hmm. You know, it's somebody you love. You know, it's paying back, or sometimes people say it's paying back, or it's our family responsibility, you know, to take care of someone you love. Great.
When they respond.
Mm-hmm. When they respond, when they show appreciations, we do tell caregivers they can respond. We just need to catch it. We need to find those nuances. We need to find those signals that they respond. It could be a wink of the eyes. It could be a hug. It could be just squeeze on your hand, particularly at later stages. Anything else? Laurie?
A lot of families will think I'm providing the best care possible for my loved one, and they're often not certain about strangers providing the care, but they think they provide the best care because they know their person that well.
Great. So
We also caution that it's good to have other people help you, just like kids need a lot of grown-ups to love
great.
them.
You read my mind. Actually, read ahead of on the slides. Yes, we saw a lot of exemplary caregivers. They always want to do the best, do more for the loved one. But it turned out they are very stressed. You know, they always set very high bars. You know, they have to do it all themselves. You know, even sometimes they accuse their siblings when their siblings try to fill in for one day. So those, you know, we typically do not encourage those too high expectations. Sometimes we call it unrealistic expectation of yourself as a caregiver. That could do harm on your own well-being.
One positive things I've had was learning more about the community that was willing to be supportive.
Mm-hmm.
That was something, you know, you tend to be your own unit, take care of your family and your needs. You discover the community that will step alongside you. It's very reassuring.
That's great.
Okay, can you repeat that?
So she basically saying like, you know, you are bring back to the community, right? So you are actually doing something beneficial for the community, right? Learning something new, also learn something. So if we are playing like the Wheel of Fortune, you probably all hit the points here. So it's like, you know, you grow from this experience, you know, you learn about what's available in the community. You're actually contributing to this community by taking care of your loved ones. So we probably all hit all the 7 points here, you know, and want to elaborate. So this one is also a video, the same person talking about how she benefited from taking care of her mother. You know, she benefited from personal growth, you know, learn the new skills, you know, set new examples for her own children as a role model, all those positive things. And I mentioned like a cultural perspective, like Laurie mentioned, you know, we all fear sometimes we don't feel we are caregiver, we are spouse, we are daughter, we are children, we are son-in-law or daughter-in-law. The caregiver is a different role, you know, attached to those family roles, right? And in different cultures, the level of family responsibility is manifest differently. But in many cultures, I found, you know, in ethnic minority groups, in the Asian cultures, in Latino cultures, in African American cultures, even in the Caucasian cultures, family responsibility still is a primary thing. It's still the family taking care of the elders, right? In Chinese, we call it filial piety. In Japanese, it's oyakoto, bakita in Bakash, Indonesia. So all those represents families' involvement in providing care for the elders. But however, we want to stress, you know, as Laurie mentioned, if you have too high responsibility on yourself, if you have too high level of filial piety or feminism, that may set your bar for yourself very high. That can also cause actual like burden or stress. Because if you have high expectation on yourself or have high or unrealistic expectations on the one you're taking care of, you may have a high threshold to generate positive reward from caregiving. You know, you're keeping setting high bars for yourself. You know, I used to have a caregiver, you know, she wants to become the exemplary caregiver in the whole community. So she turns her husband like every 10 minutes, you know, because the husband was already bedridden. Like that exhausts herself because she tried to, you know, prevent the bad wounds. So she's setting too high a bar for herself. I'm not going to elaborate in this. But what makes it important is like, even though your appraisal is hard to change, how we cope things, how we draw social support can be manifest. So lastly, I'm going to share a little bit of some of the tips for caregivers. Hopefully it can be useful for you to take away. So those three things, appraisal, coping, and the social support. And those three questions you can ask yourself. So in your belief system, do you have realistic expectation of yourself as a caregiver? Do you have to do everything perfectly? Do you have to keep the care recipient within your eyes 24/7? Are you able to see, the positive sides of providing care to someone? And the second question, what's your coping style? How do you cope in times of difficulty in general? Some people told me, oh, they like music. Personal hobbies can be one, like working on puzzles or meditation. All those could be your coping. And, if we extract it into like, are you more focused on problem solving? Are you more focused on venting out your emotions? I wouldn't say one is preferable than the other, but if you have mixed ones, then you can letting out your negative emotions, but also focus on problem solving. So that's balanced coping. Very good. Are you more proactive? Someone got a diagnosis, then the next day, he has all those care plan lined up, all the legal documents, financial documents, durable power of attorney, all set up. Those very proactive. And they are keeping tracking of what Scott just mentioned, all the latest advancement in medical breakthroughs in treating Alzheimer's disease. Very proactive, we saw that. We also saw deny avoidance coping as well. In some scenarios, deny avoidance, it might help a little bit, might help, but in the long run, it may not be the case, particularly for caregivers. And the last question for yourself is, where do you draw on strengths to help to deal with those difficult situations? Spirituality, religion, definitely that's a great source to draw our strengths. What are other places? Do you have some friends you can talk to? Do you go to social groups that you can join? Are you a more like humorous person? Are there any other hobbies that you can join to distract you? So all those things can be helpful to mitigate the risk of the stressful caregiving situations. Food, I forgot to mention food. For me, myself, I know this seminar is during the dinner time. I don't know what the Scott already have. I can give you some answers. What's the best Chinese restaurant in town after this? So all those food, people do authentic food. We all like to eat healthy, like the study you just mentioned, Mediterranean food. But sometimes they didn't give us the pleasure, right? So I would say balance your diet. Occasionally a scoop ice cream make your day. Just go for it. I will skip that one. So what's the last I'm going to talk about what's available in the Tri-County area, particularly also allude to some available statewide online or in Michigan particularly. So the Tri-County Office on Aging, they have like a dementia consultation. So this is one by one. The caseworker, actually she's a limited licensed social work, KC. She can be reached by this number. She will do optional counseling. So she more focused on problem solving. So if you have a technical problem, like say, set a durable power of attorney, or have a question about like finding a care facility for a loved one, a memory care, so she can help sort through that. They also have evidence-based caregiver workshops and classes offered at Tri-County on Aging. And then I want to highlight what's available in my lab, in the MSU Dementia Care Support Lab. And Wen has some flyers, he will distribute. So we have an online platform that provides caregiver education and resources and information. So if you are interested, you can sign up. We'll send you, once you sign up, so you will receive information that's tailored on your interest, specific tailored to your interest. Then the other one we provide is counseling. I want to mention the Chawata thing is, this is what it looks like. So once you sign up, you will get customized caregiver supports, caregiver information from our platform. And particularly, if you know someone who is from ethnic minority groups, so we're developing a material specifically for Latinos and Asians as well. So we'll have those resources specific to tailor to those cultural groups.
You, for the benefit of the Zoomers, tell them how to reach you to get this information and to sign up since they won't be able to sign up here?
So in the end, I have my email list in the last slide. That's where they can reach us. That'd be good. And the other is the counseling. So this one is, we call it PISTA, which is the full name is Processing Inner Strength Toward Actualization. You know, it's similar to the word piscature. We all know eating nuts will not get us nuts, right? So eating nuts is healthy for your brain. And because it contains like fatty acids, minerals, and all those vitamins. So those are healthy. So our PISTA machine is like, you can see there, we have like 3 or 4 types of machine. So if you're interested, you can sign in, we'll lend you the machine. It's basically, you just put it on around your ears, then you'll hear the binaural sounds or beats. And some people, in some way similar to white noise, but the mechanism is different. They're trying to ask your brain waves to converge to the 2 different sounds, and it will help addressing anxiety or negative feelings, and it probably improve your insight and confidence, self-confidence. So, okay.
So we can do questions.
So that's the last slide we have. The takeaways: dementia caregiving is stressful, but it could be rewarding. Just need to see the silver lines, under the cloud, and pay attention to your own self-care, by actually seeking for help. I think I finished. So that's last slide shows how you can contact us. Okay.
Thank you. Can I just, yeah, clap everybody. Then we have some chat questions that I'll ask you. Hi, I'm from Age Alive, and I'd like to make sure everyone is aware of our 2023 annual research forum that we'll be having at the MSU Federal Credit Union Farm Lane branch on Thursday, April 27th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And we are so honored that Dr. Scott Counts and Dr. Faye Sun will both be panelists for us at that session with their colleague, Dr. Irving Vega as well. And we will have a keynote speaker from the Dementia Minds Council. We will be positive and looking at lifelong quality of life for people with dementia and their caregivers. And we will have a panel of folks who are living with dementia as well. So we will send out a notice through the town and gown list so that you'll all receive the information, and we hope that you can attend. So we have some questions that came through the chat that I can read for you.
Stella,
Yeah, I can get started with the questions. Our first question in the chat that we have here is from Paul Gross. He asks, he wonders why the FDA has not retested TMS given the problems with the initial 2015 study. And he also wants to know what your guys' opinion is on electrical and magnetic stimulation and why the FDA has favored the chemical treatments, which only slow the decline.
Yeah, so there are, TMS is still being tested, actually. There's a guy named Ben Hampstead at the University of Michigan who's using sort of a transcranial stimulation model. And the idea there is that it helps to sort of improve brain activity through that stimulation, and so I don't think the book has been completely shut on that as a therapy. The other thing I would say is that, and I had another slide, but we're sort of running a little tight on time. But there are, I think, about 80 different drugs right now that are somewhere in the pipeline in some sort of clinical trial. And they're not all just directed against amyloid, right? So some of them are actually directed against the tau, the tangles. Some of them are directed against inflammation in the brain, which is important. You hear about things like oxidative stress, which is, just a form of stress on those neurons. It keeps them from functioning properly. Trying to improve targeting the vasculature in the brain just to keep the blood flow moving properly. And so I think what's going to happen at the end of the day, is we're going to wind up with what we call a polypharmaceutical approach. So it's sort of like a cocktail, right? So you know, like with HIV, they finally got it under control by coming up with a cocktail of antivirals instead of just one, right? And so this may be the same thing. And we're also getting into an age of personalized medicine. So we're starting to understand that some people have different genetic risk factors that can be biologically important for how their brain may be working or maybe not working so well. And so what we would envision is that, you know, at some point, you know, so for instance, the cocktail that would be good for me might not be the best cocktail for you. And then you would have your own cocktail based on your genetic makeup and specific issues. You know, so maybe there's we're trying to get to the amyloid, we're trying to get to the tau, we're doing TMS, you know, cognitive therapy, like cognitive training is another thing that is being tested right now as well. And so I think, yes, it's right now it's mainly chemical for sure, but there are lots of different chemical treatments that they're working on. But I do think it'll be important to consider some of these other alternatives as sort of an adjunct therapy to the chemicals. So, but good question. I'd kind of they're still doing that at some at Michigan, University of Michigan.
Paul, if you wanted to unmute yourself, just click the microphone in the bottom left corner of your screen, then you should be able to talk.
Yeah, she has.
People want to ask questions.
Maybe while we wait, we can go ahead with another question. Let's see. All right, we've got another one here. At the end of a sleeping session, does the brain move into a cleansing away of brain debris? Also, does laying on the left side of your head with your head down lead to a better way for the debris to be removed?
Okay, yeah. So the left versus right. That's I maybe I missed something, but I'm just not familiar with that. I apologize. Maybe there's something to it based on how things drain into your lymph nodes or something. But yes, so the idea is that when you're asleep, there are several different pathways that toxins and cellular debris, even things like amyloid or tau, that gets released when a neuron dies before it, you know, there are ways that the brain can flush all that out. And that's why another reason why sleep is another, you know, we're talking about reducing your risk. Well, getting a good night's sleep is sometimes easier said than done, right? But trying to develop good sleep habits is also an important way to reduce risk because of that sort of drainage pathway. And you know, the other part about that too, of course, is that when we're sleeping, our memories are consolidating, right? And so that gives us just more time to try and, you know, remember the stuff that we picked up, you know, during the day, for instance. And in fact, I'm actually working on with a lady. She's actually up there on the board right now, Roxana Carrara at the University of Southampton. She's been studying this pathway that removes amyloid from the brain. And what we think is happening is that those neurons, they start when you're asleep, they fire differently. And so they help when they fire the way they do, it helps to sort of propel that drainage system into action, if that makes sense.
Go ahead, Paul.
Okay, I just wanted to ask another question about, ask a question about the TMS again. My brother has early onset Alzheimer's and he's in his late 50s. So I've been trying to, I've been reading everything I can, and I ran across a bunch of studies. a lot of them done in other countries using electrical stimulation of one kind or another. And a number of them found very nice results that actually cognition and memory improved after the study. And these were controlled studies. It's not the chemicals that have been used, like the lecanemab, just reduces the rate at which the person is declining. But these studies actually found that the person's memory and cognition improved. And yet the technique of the electrical stimulation seems to be unknown in Americans. People just don't know about it. I know that there's studies going on, but in the United States, there's a lot of studies going on in other countries. And the reason it's not known in the United States is because there was a study that the FDA was meant to FDA approval. It was done like in around 2015. But that study, I believe, from what I've read about it, used people of all ages, all stages of Alzheimer's. And the subsequent studies have found the positive results only with people in early stages. And I think that's kind of a general pattern with a lot of these, treatments. So I'm frustrated with the FDA that they have not taken a second look at the electrical stimulation. And I have to say I've kind of lost respect for them with the Aduhelm scandal that was just amazing. And I'm sure you've read the article in Science Magazine about how that scandal slowed research on alternate, other than chemical, everything other than Aduhelm was slowed tremendously because of that scandal with this fraudulent data put out by this scientist at University of Minnesota. So I just feel the TMS has been approved now in the European Union, in Israel, and in Australia. And I was just wondering if you've kept up on this and if you know if they've been using this technique in those countries and what results they're having.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm sorry to hear about your brother.
Yeah.
And good luck to you as a like Dr. Sun was talking about as a potential caregiver for him, right? But so I am not really completely up to speed on the TMS. I agree that it's unfortunate that the amyloid hypothesis, as they call it, has sort of been the predominant theory in the field, and so that's sort of the horse they keep flogging, so to speak. And what's happened is because they haven't had a lot of success with those drugs. It's having some people some are in research company or pharmaceutical companies just leaving that space altogether, right? Just because they just can't. It just seems like too much of a waste of money. But and so that stifles innovation, right? As far as the FDA, the one thing I would say is that even over in the last 5 to 8 years, we've really started to appreciate that it's very possible that some of these drugs that have failed in clinical trials were because the people that were enrolled in the trials already had the disease, right? They were already diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and as we've seen, that just may be too late.
Right.
So maybe in that case, the TMS might keep them stable, right? I mean, I'm not sure. But I do think if in the early stages, there could be some benefit to that. And, barring, and yes, so certainly the US isn't using that tool to the same extent that some of the European and Asian countries are doing. But what you guys could do would be to be proactive and seek out folks that might be willing to administer that therapy. What I would do is I would go to, if you just type in Michigan Alzheimer's Disease Center, it'll take you to the University of Michigan site. And just so you know, the university, so Michigan has its own Alzheimer's Disease Research Center that's funded by the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, okay? And it's one of about 35 centers across the country. But it's a 3-university center. It's administratively seated in Ann Arbor, and that's where all the patients go. But there are also researchers like myself who are involved at Michigan State, and then also researchers at Wayne State that are involved, and they see patients over in Detroit as well. But there is a guy, and I think you could probably find the study.
These are just clinicals.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry. What I was going to say was that these are clinical trials. I wasn't able to find anybody who could actually treat a patient with electrical or magnetic stimulation.
Oh yeah. Okay. I would contact them and just try and figure out if anybody's doing that just as a treatment. I think if it's not FDA approved, then that's just not something we can do. But again, it might be worth.
The FDA is a roadblock.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I think we have a couple other questions waiting. Thank you, though. I appreciate your concern, Paul. Hopefully we can.
The federal agencies are very risk averse, and that's it. The NIH is like that too. And so that sort of tends to stifle innovation. And then of course, finally, they try and railroad something through that's not even. That doesn't even really seem to have any clinical benefit. So it's like, what are you guys doing? I agree with you. It's frustrating.
All right. Do we have any questions in the People's Church over there?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Any comments? COVID, long haul, brain fog, anticipated or postulated accelerated decline in cognitive impairment leading to dementia, or is it too early to be seeing any changes like that? Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah. So the question is about what do we think? What do we know about so far with how COVID is impacting, or long haul COVID, for instance, is impacting our risk for dementia in people who got COVID. And certainly it increased inflammation in the brain that maybe may just have set off. The answer is we don't know yet, really. There seems to be an increase. So the other thing that was happening, though, is that people with COVID were having more strokes. So it was having something to do with creating some sort of thrombolytic or whatever you would say environment where they're more prone to having strokes. And then when that, of course, happens, with strokes, of course, it's all location, right? So if it's in a cognitive brain region, then that can be a dementing, event, right? But I think that's currently being studied. And I think my guess is there'll be something to it. Just because of you have two main events happening with the severe COVID infections in the brain, and one of them is a dysregulation of the vasculature, the blood flow and getting strokes, and then the other one is inflammation, and we're really starting to appreciate that inflammation in the brain is a big driver of dementia and all the different diseases that cause dementia. So, do you have any thoughts about the COVID stuff?
Oh, okay. I think I agree with you. The answer is unknown yet, but the NIH just has some recent RFPs just specific focus on funding researchers looking at a long COVID and its impact on brain health. They're just coming out. So I believe a lot of researchers are looking at, but I agree with you, two possible mechanism is, leading those risks for, so for the stroke and also inflammation. Yeah.
So
All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah,
for
we
running
have
a
a
little
question
late.
here in the room.
I was curious about the impact of COVID isolation.
Oh, yeah, that's another, and that's another good one. You want to take that one? So there were also, the question was about, the impact of isolation from COVID. And we all know that being socially engaged also reduces your risk. And so that was a particularly, maybe you want to give some insight of this from the caregiver side, right? I mean, so there were just situations where people weren't able to get the right kind of care, right? Because everyone had to stay isolated.
That's anecdotal, but in China, in my research partners, they do see a lot of suicides, during the COVID time, particularly among the elders, particularly for those living in high-rise buildings in big cities. They really being. Oh, you cannot hear? Yeah, they can't get out, and because the quarantine. So when they stuck in the high-rise buildings, we saw quite a significant increase in those suicide cases. But I think your question is it's not for people affected by COVID, right? It's for regular people who experiencing COVID-related social isolation, how that in general increase their risks for a brain health or for cognitive decline. That's definitely, I think there is, I think we didn't cover this. There is a list of risk factors, besides advanced age, genetic reasons, there are a lot of lifestyle factors. Even among those lifestyle factors, emotional well-being is one of it, other than exercise, physical domains like, sleep, lack of pain, vascular diseases. So emotions still also a very good, important protective factor or risk factor for brain health.
Sure.
We'll give you one more. Okay, we talked about a lot of scientific stuff and theoretical stuff. My question is, if you suspect that a person is having some issues, you go to your family doctor, then what happens?
The question is, if you suspect that someone has dementia and you go to your family doctor, then what happens? Well, one of the things that we're trying to do in general at the advocacy level, and Faye mentioned the Michigan Dementia Coalition, and this is kind of more aspirational right now than say programmatic, but it's trying to train family physicians, to recognize dementia and be able to make an educated guess that this person needs to be referred to a specialist, a geriatrician or a neurologist. So,
We have those people in this area?
Well, I'm from Grand Rapids, so yeah.
You said early identification is so important.
Yeah.
Yes.
But who's gonna do that?
Who's going to do it, right?
Yeah.
That's my-
So her question is in this community, are there any specialists either in neurologists or or geropsychiatrist who can help early diagnosis and provide treatment? At MSU, we used to have one, but you mentioned, she left. I know she left. Are you saying she's coming back?
No,
I'm so thrilled to hear.
Kevin Foley.
Oh, he occasionally comes back to MSU to do that. He's a geriatric.
Yeah, there's a gentleman named Kevin Foley. He operates a clinic at Mercy Health in Grand Rapids, but I think he also has clinic hours at Sparrow as well. So
yeah, at the Memorial Hospital, we have one, which about in Owasso, about 20 or 30 minutes away. We have a neurologist there. I forgot her name. She is there. She is also our partner as well. But other than that, we have clients from the UP. They have to go to Wisconsin to see a neurologist. And as Scott mentioned, there are different types of dementia. So we consider specific diagnosis is important. But in terms of later treatment or care planning, once they get a diagnosis, they probably can be managed at the family doctor level or with specific, with the social support in the community.
Yeah, I think Dr. Foley is at the MSU clinics.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
2 or
here-
3
here in
days
East
a
Lansing.
week.
Yeah, so, and I know his wait time to see him is about 4 months or so. So I would go ahead and call the office. And if you just type in Kevin Foley, Foley, MSU, it takes you right to him. So, yeah.
Great. Well, I think that is all we have time for today. Thank you, Dr. Sun and Dr. Count, for taking the time to be with us today. I know it was a bit of a travel, but we appreciate you making the time to deliver such a wonderful presentation. And thank you, everyone, for being patient with us at the beginning while we figured out all of the tech stuff. Just continuing to support Town and Gown. So thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Stella.
Thank you.
Why there's always technical stuff, it's like, yeah.
I'm sorry, you hit the head on the right. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
yeah, yeah.
Also, yeah, Kevin, I think he also has office in Grand Rapids.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, and his wife is a social worker. I
I think
believe.